It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." And Jesus answered, "Those who had a bath need only to wash their feet. Your whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." I have avoided speaking about my departure as your senior pastor and my new position as a chaplain at Elma College for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I'm not leaving under duress. I'm not going because something terrible happened, or I'm angry, or you're angry with me, or the church is falling down, or you can't afford to keep the building open, or that I'm so burned out from each and every one of you that I have to go and burn the pulpit down when I leave. I'm leaving under very good circumstances, and if there's a visitor in the midst, and I'm sure there are, I don't want a visitor to hear me up here during this long goodbye lamenting my departure or wondering aloud about what's going to happen to the people's church, for I am sure good things will happen. I love the idea that this congregation has grown, that you are continuing to grow in spirit, and that you will grow into the future. And so I can say with confidence that while this is a change, it is one that has the potential for so much good for the people's church because you are a healthy, full of spirit, loving, hospitable group of men, women, and children. And it has been a joy to be a part of you. And I marvel to imagine where you will go from here. But today, I will break that oath to myself and talk about my departure, if for no other reason, I have 3 more sermons. And quite frankly, if I bomb this one, by the time you complain to personnel, I'm already gone anyway. So this is Reverend Interim's problem if I mess up today. I have been your pastor for 7 years, and I am here as your pastor because you chose me to serve here as your pastor. The Christian interpretation of pastor is very different than minister, evangelist, teacher, or any of the other wonderful titles that we see in the Old and New Testament. A pastor, and we have the image there in the New Testament, is meant to be, metaphorically, a shepherd to a very particular flock. Now, it's funny that we as sheep select our shepherd, but that's how it works here, and I have had the pleasure, the joy, the privilege of being one of your shepherds over the past almost 7 years. I am leaving that position, and I'm not going to be another shepherd, I'm going to be a chaplain, which is very different because the organization chooses a chaplain, and you serve the people regardless of their faith, and whether or not they chose to have you as their chaplain or not, you are serving in that very particular role now to the institution. I will miss being a shepherd. You have trusted me. You have let me be part of your most intimate moments of life and death. I have baptized, I have officiated weddings, I have watched friends die, and I have celebrated their lives. And those are beautiful, holy, and sacred moments. And as a shepherd, as a pastor, I have been eternally blessed by your presence. Jesus was a shepherd, and his sheep, his disciples, the ones that chose to follow him, he was specifically called to care for them. We all are an extension of that flock still today. We have also been called just like his disciples. And while he was also an evangelist and also a revolutionary and also a teacher, I believe the gospel shows us that he was, first and foremost, the Messiah, the Son of God, who was the good shepherd to humanity. And he knew his role as shepherd was about to conclude with his arrest, his death, and his crucifixion very shortly after the passage that I just read this morning. And so there was an anxiety you can feel in the passage itself. They're his last words to his disciples. Someone noted this past week that my sermons over the past few weeks and even the past few months have been, as they politely said, a bit more jagged, a bit sharper, a bit more biting, and full of more swearing. I have seemed a bit angrier, more impassioned, and more emotional. And they asked, very gently, "Are you speaking this way from the pulpit now because of your impending departure?" And the question was a challenge for me because as I heard it, I listened to the person say, "Are you saying the things that you wouldn't have otherwise said if you weren't leaving?" And I wanted to respond with that being not the case, but after just the smallest bit of self-reflection, I can admit that yes, my upcoming expiration date as the senior pastor has influenced my words, my actions, and my attitudes both inside this pulpit and outside of it as your shepherd in this community. It's not as though I'm speaking words that I wouldn't say otherwise, but there is a bit of urgency in my messages lately that wasn't there 6 years ago, wasn't there as I was preparing to come here. And I hope you'll not fault me for that, but it does give me a desire to speak, knowing that I only have so much time left in this pulpit, to say all the things that I wish I would have said louder. Anyone who ever leaves a pastorate should leave with a bit of regret and a bit of things left undone, for they'd be kidding themselves if they thought all of the work of ministry was complete by the time they, God's anointed, left the pulpit of their particular congregation. I'm far too aware of my shortcomings, my foibles, and my inability to live up to everyone's expectations, and I know I'm leaving things undone. I've quoted before from Hamlet, my absolute favorite part of all of Shakespeare's writing, when Polonius speaks to his son and his daughter just on the cusp of adulthood, as he says to them all of these wonderful pieces of advice. And it comes in rapid fire. Do this, don't do that. Make sure you find someone who loves you. Go out and be a good citizen in the world. And it feels like a father who's watching his son or daughter come of age and wants to tell them all the things that he wished he would have said when they were growing up. It's not that it's too late, but it's a bit false to put it out there just at the end rather than throughout the training and throughout the journey. For I'm about to do something else that I've wanted to avoid from this particular pulpit, a trope that I find in pastors that is not only insulting, but at times a bit nauseating. I'm going to compare myself to Jesus for the rest of the sermon. Because Jesus was also in his final moments with his disciples, the people that chose to listen to him. And I say this to especially the young people who are in here. You do have a choice. You can go kicking and screaming to this place. You can create enough of a fuss that your parents will give up and not bring you to church. And yet, God bless you, teenagers. You showed up here today. You have chosen to be a part of this place. And to older people, you can do the same thing with your spouses. If you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. Make it miserable for them, and you can stay home. Instead, you all have chosen to listen to me for nearly 400 sermons. And so I take that very seriously, and I appreciate the trust you have placed in me. I have said things that you have not liked. I have said things that you have enjoyed, you have learned, you have rejected, you have grown, and the flock has changed throughout all of this time. And I admit at the very end, I'm wondering, what should I have said more of? Jesus seems to have this very same anxiety in that Last Supper. We always present the Last Supper with such confidence that Jesus is up there breaking the bread and offering such beautiful words. But my goodness, can you imagine knowing you're about to die? Imagining this is the last chance you're going to get to speak to people who love you. The last chance you're going to have a cup of wine with someone who wants to toast you. There's got to be a bit of anxiety in that. We certainly see it in his prayer afterwards. And so here he is taking this very special moment, and instead of talking about so much theology that maybe he'd brought up before, he goes in a very different direction. He offers this farewell act of love. In this Last Supper, we do not see the emphasis that we see in the other three Gospels. Instead, here, we see priority placed on foot washing as a central act, which is quite a change from the other stories of the Last Supper. The foot washing seems to highlight portions of Jesus' ministry up to that point, and his identity, not just as the Christ, but as a servant. It's an act of hospitality and service that would have been offered to any traveler who would have come to your house. So if someone was walking on the dusty streets in their sandals and they came over, you would always offer to wash their feet, but you would do so having one of your servants do it. And if your servant, or you didn't have them around, couldn't afford a servant, you would then have your children wash the feet of your guest. And forgive me for saying it, if you didn't have children, then men, you would look at your wife and expect the women in the house to wash the feet of those particular guests. It was always the marginalized who were washing feet. It was always the ones who were the lowest level of society, the lowest in the family, the lowest in the house, who were asked to wash the feet. And so for Jesus, who is the teacher, Jesus, who is their rabbi, Jesus, who is their shepherd, to kneel down and do this is quite a change. He does it so deliberately in this passage, too. The description of it is very detailed, almost in a way that the gospel writer in John doesn't give us in other passages. We hear him take off his robe, wrap the towel around, kneel down, pour the water, grab the water. It seems to be very deliberate to demonstrate to us there's no ambiguity here. He is the one doing it all. It's not that he paid someone else to be a servant, or that he told someone else to do it in his name. He does it himself. And when Peter is approached by Jesus, he gets angry in the same way Jesus was angry last week. He feels this is a betrayal. This is not what you're supposed to be doing, and he's saying it a bit out of guilt. Peter doesn't want the shepherd to be kneeling down doing this. And yet, that's the promise of the full relationship Jesus is offering. No, I will be both your teacher and I will also learn. I am sheep and shepherd. I am man and I am God. There are many times in our lives when that role changes from whatever we were to whatever we might become. The obvious ones, I think, for us in this community is when we watch any of our wonderful students become experts themselves. When the professor sees a former student come back who's now an expert in their field. Or in our families, when the people who took care of us when we were young, our parents and our grandparents who nursed us back to health, when we are then asked to be their caretakers. When the person who carried you up the stairs as a child, you now support with your arm as they walk in. When the parent becomes the one who receives the attention. Those are hard moments for us, either as the caretaker or the care receiver, because it changes our notion of what we're supposed to be doing and what role we are supposed to have. Today and this week, we have seen that role reversal, especially with our young people. This last week, we watched teenagers, children really, take on the role of leadership in our country, where they spoke out, when they risked suspension and expulsion by walking out of their schools, when they said things that aren't popular with their parents or with the political elite, when they tried to lead us, when they knelt down and started washing our feet. And like many other adults, we looked at them and had to say, please don't do that. We'll take care of it. You don't have to be the one to do this. Let me do that. Or in the more insulting way, to hear adults say, that's not your job. You don't quite understand. I heard this last week, some political pundits saying, well, those young people don't really understand what they're saying. Those teenagers, they had words put in their mouth, obviously, by political operatives, or they'd been coached by this political party. For shame. Kids do have things to say, and a lot of us adults are quite threatened by the teenagers in our midst who lead us, and who have faith, and who have hope, and yet aren't as jaded or as cynical as some of us adults have found ourselves these days. And that's a difficult role reversal for us to accept. The ones that we are supposed to be teaching, the ones that we're supposed to be supporting, for them to now support and teach us. It's being carried by the ones that we used to carry. In reality, we must let our children be the ones now to wash the sin off of our hands and feet, rather than foolishly trying to rub the stain of our past transgressions off of our guilty fingers. We have created the circumstances into which they are now called to protest. We have sinned in such a way, and we have dirt on us. And it's uncomfortable for us to watch the ones who we're supposed to be serving now speak up on behalf of all of us. Change is coming. I don't think it's coming from those of us who are my age and older, and that is a challenge. For now, they are the servants in our society. The teenagers in our midst, they are the ones serving our best needs when we were supposed to be the ones protecting them. And it's time to let ourselves be served by those others, by those people who don't even have driver's licenses yet, and realize that they have very good things to say. I am delighted to see the Third Way contest that happened today. And the pieces of advice and guidance that our young people wrote, that's just a piece of what we have here surrounding us in our midst. 2 weeks ago, I was spoiled enough to get to go with our middle schoolers and a couple of high schoolers up north to go skiing. And I know I was there as their pastor to impart spiritual wisdom and to guide them and to be their shepherd. Instead, it was young people making me feel welcome. It was students saying, hey, pastor, you can ski with us, knowing that they don't want to ski with me, but that's nice of them to do that. And then to hear them talking about the world around them, to hear them wonder about how things might be better, to wonder what hospitality looks like, to wonder how we are actually forgiven for our sins. My goodness, I baptized some of those babies, and now they're speaking up. It's both frightening and joyful. I know that I am leaving as a shepherd, but that does not mean that you are shepherdless. It is amazing to watch people step up into roles of leadership unexpectedly and become those who will now serve, who will lead, and who will guide us. I pray for you, the People's Church of East Lansing, the same way that I pray for Church in the Hills and Bel Air, for my friends in New Jersey at Hillsborough Presbyterian, and for those at First Presbyterian in Brighton, at all of the churches I've served before, where I have been blessed enough to be considered a shepherd and then have walked away. Because I see in each of those places there are still leaders who come forward. Those who were once the learners are now the teachers. Those who were led are now leading. And that is happening here and will continue to happen here. And we must embrace that. Be thankful that our students have the resolve to walk out of a class knowing that they will be punished, that some of their parents will be disappointed, that people will tell them you don't quite understand politics, or you don't really understand the Second Amendment, or you don't really understand the right to have a firearm. Let our kids speak up, and let them guide us in the gospel now and always. I'm excited to imagine one of them is going to be standing in this pulpit someday very, very soon. And when they do, let us all rejoice. Let us pray.